Seraphine had a plan. It was a good plan. She had spent 6 weeks building it, piece by piece, the way you'd build something you couldn't afford to break. She knew which corridor smelled like onion soup and bad decisions. She knew which guard dragged his left boot when he was tired. She knew the east gate had a loose latch that clicked open if you lifted it at exactly the right angle. Not too hard, not too soft, the way you'd coax a stubborn drawer. She had walked the route 11 times in her head before she walked it once with her feet. She was ready. She was not ready. The first thing that went wrong was the wall sconces. Some deeply unhelpful, deeply inconsiderate person had moved them. Not all of them, just the ones in the east corridor, just the ones she had used as landmarks. The third sconce on the right was supposed to mark the turn, except the third sconce on the right no longer existed where it had existed before, which meant the turn she had memorized was now a solid stone wall. She walked into it with her whole chest. The sound was not dignified. The feeling was not dignified. She stood in the dark with her hand pressed flat against her sternum and breathed very carefully, because the alternative was to make a second sound, and she had already used up her one allowed sound for the evening. The vial in her coat pocket was fine. She checked. That was the important thing. It was a small vial, no longer than her thumb, sealed with wax and wrapped in cloth. Inside it was a compound she had pressed herself, over 3 nights, using bark she had smuggled in among the cooking herbs and roots she had ground to paste with a spoon handle, because she didn't have a mortar. It was the most important thing in this palace. It was the only thing that mattered. She pressed her palm to it through the fabric of her coat, and felt it, solid and intact, and thought, good, we are fine, the plan is still working. She turned left instead of right, and found the corridor. Seraphine Voss was not supposed to be in this palace. She was not supposed to be in this kingdom, technically, but that was a longer story, and this was not the time. What mattered was that she had been here for 2 months, 31 days, and approximately 6 hours, living under the name Mira Ansel, working as a handmaiden to one of the court ladies, and doing it well enough that no one had looked at her twice. That was the trick she had learned a long time ago. Don't be interesting. Don't be memorable. Be useful and quiet, and slightly dull, the kind of person whose face slips out of memory the moment they leave the room. She had made herself into someone forgettable, the way you'd make yourself into furniture. Present, functional, unremarkable. It was a talent. She was modest about it the way she was modest about most of her talents, which was to say she was privately quite pleased with herself and showed it to no one. She moved through the corridor with her back close to the wall, not touching it. Touching walls left oils from your hands, something her old teacher had taught her before everything went sideways, and kept her breathing measured. In through the nose, out through the mouth, slow and even, the way you breathe when there's a patient in front of you whose pulse is doing something alarming, and you cannot afford to look alarmed. The palace at night was a different animal from the palace in the day. In the day it had people in it. People made it loud and warm and navigable. People were a kind of cover. At night the bones of the place showed through. The torches threw light in long, uncertain shapes. The stone held cold from winters she hadn't been here for. The tapestry stirred when no window was open, and she had not let herself think too hard about that. She passed a guard station, empty, which meant the rotation had just changed, which meant she had exactly 9 minutes before the next one came around. She had timed this. She had timed everything. She moved through the outer hall and down the servants' stair and into the courtyard passage, and the whole time she kept her hand against her coat pocket, just to feel the vial there. Fine. Still intact. She was almost impressed with herself. The courtyard was open and cold and full of the kind of silence that had weight to it. She paused at the arch, looked, counted. 1 torch on the eastern wall, burning low. 1 on the north gate, burning full. No movement, no sound except the wind coming off the mountain range to the west, the kind of wind that had been traveling for days before it arrived and was tired and mean about it. She crossed the courtyard in 18 steps. She counted. She always counted. Counting was something to do with the part of her brain that wanted to spiral. The gate was straight ahead, iron, old, heavy enough that it took 2 guards to open it properly for carts, but she didn't need cart width. She needed the smaller door set into the larger gate, the one that was meant for foot traffic, the one with the loose latch. She reached it, put her hand on the iron, lifted at exactly the right angle. The latch did not move. She tried again, precise, unhurried. The angle was correct. She was certain the angle was correct. She had the angle memorized in her hands, in the specific rotation of her wrist. She had practiced this in her room with a similar latch she had borrowed from the supply closet and returned before morning. The latch did not move. Locked. She stood there for a moment with her hand on the iron and her coat pressed close and the wind from the west cutting across the back of her neck. Well, she thought, there it is. She checked the vial. Still fine, small and solid through the cloth. The wax seal was intact. The compound inside was stable at this temperature. She had calculated this. It was fine. Everything was fine. Everything was not fine. She was standing at a locked gate in the palace of the Alpha King of the Northern Reach, carrying something she absolutely should not have, under a name that was not hers, with 6 weeks of planning dissolving quietly into the cold air around her. She needed to think. She needed to think, and she needed to not panic, and she needed to find the secondary exit, the one she had identified 3 weeks ago, but had classified as a last resort, because it involved crossing the upper courtyard, and the upper courtyard had 2 guard posts and a dog. She did not love the dog option. She turned around to cross back to the arch. Seraphine Voss. Not a question, not a command. Just her name. Her real name. The one she had buried under 6 weeks of being Mira Ansel. The one she had not heard spoken aloud in 2 years. Dropped into the dark like a stone dropped into still water, without drama, without effort. Like he had simply been holding it. Like he had been waiting all evening for the right moment to set it down. She turned. He was standing at the far end of the courtyard. She had not seen him there. She had looked. She had counted steps and checked torchlight and catalogued every shadow in that courtyard before she crossed it, and she had not seen him because he had not been there, or he had been there, and been so still he had registered to her eyes as part of the architecture, which was, she would think about this later, the kind of thing that should have been impossible for a man that size. Kalir Dam, Alpha King of the Northern Reach, the last person in this or any adjacent world that she needed to be standing in front of right now. He did not lean against things. She had noticed this about him in the 2 months she had spent being invisible in his palace. He simply existed in a space, and the space adjusted itself around him, the way a room adjusts when you put something very heavy in the center of it. He was standing with his hands at his sides and his shoulders back and his face doing the thing his face did, which was nothing, less than nothing, the complete and architectural stillness of a man who had decided a very long time ago that the world did not get to see what he was thinking. He was looking at her the way you look at something you've already figured out. He knows my name, she thought. And then, immediately, without choosing to, the vial, left breast pocket, inside coat, not outside. If he searches me, he'll find it. Her mind did this. It had always done this. In the moments when the thing underneath was too large to look at directly, her mind bolted sideways and grabbed onto something else and held it with both hands, turned it over and over, catalogued it, counted it, assessed it, kept itself busy with the irrelevant and the concrete so it didn't have to be still with the enormous and the terrifying. The vial was fine. She needed to focus on the vial. "My lord," she said. Her voice was steady. She was not ready to think about how she managed that. He walked toward her, not fast, not slow. The pace of someone who has never once in his life needed to hurry because nothing has ever left without his permission. She did not step back. She wanted to. Some part of her, the sensible part, the part that had survived this long by being smart about when to run, was making a very clear case for stepping back. Stepping back and then stepping back again, and then finding a wall to put between herself and whatever this was about to be. She stayed where she was, her hand pressed against her coat pocket. Fine. Still fine. The wax seal held. He stopped. 4 feet between them, maybe 5. Close enough that she could see the scar on his jaw. She had seen it before. In the 2 months she had been in his palace, glimpsed it across throne rooms and hallways, and once at a council session she was serving during a bad scar, the kind that came from a wound sealed too quickly. The tissue contracted wrong. The surface puckered along the jawline in a way a better healer would have prevented. She knew exactly what temperature the compound had been when she'd applied it. She knew the resistance of the tissue under her hands. She knew the sound his breathing had made when the fever had broken. Not even a sound, really, just a change in the quality of the air in that room, a loosening, like something that had been held very tight finally letting go. She had not told anyone she had been in that room. She had not told anyone she had pressed her hands against the jaw of an unconscious man in a safe house in the Midlands while a candle burned low and the whole world outside was doing its usual business of being on fire about something. She looked at the scar and thought about the thread count of the rough cloth she'd used to clean the wound, and did not think about anything else. "The gate," he said, "has been locked since noon." His voice was what it always was, flat and even and weightless, the kind of voice that has learned that it doesn't need volume because everyone is already listening. "I noticed," she said. "You've been planning this for 6 weeks." She looked at him. He looked at her. She considered, briefly, denying it, a flat, clean denial, the kind that gives you nothing to push against. She had a good denial face. She had spent years developing it, had tested it, under conditions considerably more stressful than this. He was watching her consider the denial. She gave it up. "Closer to 7, she said. Something happened to his face. Not a smile. The landscape where a smile might eventually be built, if someone gave him enough time and reason, and possibly a map. A slight shift in the territory around his eyes. A fractional easing of the jaw. There and gone. You walked into the east corridor wall," he said. "There was a noise," she said. "Someone bumped something. You bumped it with your whole chest." She looked at him. He looked at her. "I'm aware," she said. The wind came through the courtyard and lifted the edge of her coat, and she pressed her arm against her side. Not dramatically, just a small press, just enough that she could feel the outline of the vial through the layers of fabric. She could not read him. She had spent 2 years learning to read people. Healers had to. You learned the language of a body before the person could tell you what was wrong with them. You learned to hear what the silence around an answer meant, to see the things someone was protecting by the way they held their shoulders. And she could not read Kalir Dam. She had tried before, from a distance, in the 2 months she had been here. She had watched him from corners and doorways and crowded rooms, and she had collected data points the way you collect specimens, this expression in the council meeting, this stillness when a messenger brought bad news, this specific quality of silence when he dismissed someone from the room, and she had not been able to assemble them into a picture she trusted. The only time she had read him clearly was in the safe house, and he had been unconscious, which she suspected was the closest to legible he ever got. "Why did you lock the gate?" she asked. The question surprised her slightly. She had not planned to ask it. "I didn't," he said. She waited. He said nothing else. She thought about the vial. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Who I am?" He considered this, not like he didn't know the answer, more like he was deciding which answer to give. "Long enough," he said, which was, she noted, genuinely no information at all. It was the kind of answer you gave when you wanted someone to know you could have acted sooner and chose not to, without saying why. It was a very specific kind of power move, and she found it, against everything reasonable in her, slightly impressive. She kept that to herself. "I'm not a threat to your kingdom," she said. "I know. I'm not here on behalf of anyone who wants to harm you. I know that too." She looked at him. "Then why? What is in the vial?" She stopped. Just stopped. The word died in her throat. He had not looked at her coat. He had not looked at her pocket. He was looking directly at her face, and he said it the same way he said everything. Flat, weightless, the kind of certainty that doesn't need to raise its voice. And she understood, with the particular cold clarity of a mind that works very well under pressure, that he had known about the vial for some time. Probably longer than 7 weeks. Possibly longer than she had been in his palace. "Medicine," she said. "For who?" Not a question. The inflection was flat, but the words weren't asking. They were checking, confirming something he already suspected. "Someone who needs it," she said. She watched his jaw. The scar moved when the muscle beneath it moved. He breathed through his nose, slow and controlled, the way you breathe when something is making you feel something you have decided not to show. She thought about the Midlands. She thought about a candle burning down to nothing. She thought about the way his pulse had felt under her fingers when she was checking it. Too fast, uneven, the fever doing its worst, and the specific quality of her own relief when it had steadied. She had been 21 years old. She had not known whose pulse she was steadying. She had found out 2 days later and sat very still in a barn outside of the city for about an hour, doing nothing. "There is a child," she said, "in the lower city. She is 7 years old, and she has a lung infection that is going to kill her in the next 2 weeks without intervention. The compound in that vial is the intervention. It does not exist in any apothecary in this city, because the bark it comes from does not grow on this side of the mountains. I brought it across the pass myself, which took 11 days and cost me things I am not going to list for you right now. The child's name is Nara. She lives on the street that used to be called Miller's Row before the flood took it. The compound needs to be administered in 3 doses over 9 days, and I need to deliver it tonight because I am running out of time." She stopped talking. The courtyard was very quiet. He looked at her for a long moment, the way he looked at everything, like he was not seeing the surface of it, like he was looking for the thing underneath the thing. "You infiltrated my palace," he said slowly, "to brew medicine in my supply closets." "I used the spoon handle," she said. "I put it back." Something happened then. She would have difficulty later describing what exactly happened to his face. It was not a laugh. He did not laugh. She was not even certain he knew how, in the conventional sense. It was more that something behind his expression moved, like a door opening in a building you had thought entirely solid. Just a crack, just enough to let through a thin line of light. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then the door closed. She had the feeling, sharp and strange, that she had seen something very few people had ever seen. She did not let herself think about that. She thought about the vial. 9 days, 3 doses, a 7-year-old girl with a cough that was eating her alive. "The compound," he said. "How far does it stretch?" "1 course of treatment. The vial is calibrated for a child her size. If we sent someone with a supply, it doesn't store. After 30 days at ambient temperature, the active properties break down. You'd have to have someone who knows how to make it." He looked at her, she looked at him. "I know how to make it," she said. There was a long silence. She was good at silences. She had trained herself to be. The impulse to fill silence was something she had identified as a weakness in herself at around age 17 and had been systematically defeating ever since. Silence is information. If you fill it, you lose the information and give away something about yourself for free. She stood in the cold courtyard and held the silence. He held it right back. He was, she thought, very much a man who would have made the same decision about silence at some age, and for some reason she would probably never learn, and had arrived at the same place through a completely different route, and that was, she was not going to think about that. The vial. Focus on the vial. "When I was 21, he said. She waited. In the Midlands, there was a safe house. She had known this was coming. She had known from the moment he called her by her real name that this was coming, had felt it the way you feel a storm before the sky does anything obvious about it. A pressure shift, a change in the way the air sits. She had prepared for it. She had prepared a perfectly calibrated response. Slight confusion, slight recall, the particular performance of someone working to retrieve a memory. The Midlands? I spent time there, yes. There were many safe houses during that year. It's difficult to remember them all. She stood in the courtyard with her hand against the vial and her prepared response right there, ready, and said, "I know." The 2 words landed and sat there between them. She had not meant to say that. She looked at the scar on his jaw and she thought, "I know what that felt like from the inside of my hands. I know the exact temperature of the cloth I used on it. I know you ground your teeth together in your sleep when the fever spiked, and you murmured something once. that I never identified, and I chose not to try to identify, because some things are not mine to know. She did not say any of that. You were supposed to die, she said. The wound was infected to the bone. Someone had packed it wrong. Too much pressure. Sealed the surface before the inside was clean. You had a fever of... It was very high. I worked for 9 hours. I know, he said. You weren't awake. I know that too. She looked at him. Something in his voice was different now. Still flat, still level. But underneath the levelness there was something she couldn't name, the same way you can't name the exact color of light through water. You can see it's not one thing, it's layers. I didn't know who you were, she said. I was told there was a wounded man, that he was important, that he would die without intervention, and that I was the best available. That was the whole briefing. Yes, he said. I found out afterward. Yes. I spent an hour sitting in a barn. A pause. Only an hour? She looked at him. It was a very long hour, she said. The wind came through again. It was getting colder. The mountain wind did that. It started cold and then it got worse. A slow descent that you didn't fully register until your fingers were stopping working and you were standing in someone's courtyard at 3 in the morning having a conversation you had never planned to have. She thought about the vial. 9 days, 3 doses. A girl named Nara on the street that used to be Miller's Row. She had a timetable. She had a specific window to get the first dose into the girl, a window that closed at dawn, because the girl's body was in the particular phase of the infection where the compound would absorb best in the hours before sunrise, something she had calculated using the symptom progression she had observed from the palace boundary wall with borrowed field glasses, which was, she was aware, a slightly extreme thing to have done. She needed to go. I need to go, she said. I know. She waited for the but. There was no but. He stepped to the side, not backward, not away, just to the left, a clean, deliberate step, and she realized with a strange lurching sensation that the gate behind him, not the locked foot traffic gate on the east wall, the other gate, the one she hadn't noticed, the small stone arch set into the west corner that looked like it opened onto the service alley, was not locked, had not been locked, had possibly never been locked tonight. She looked at the arch. She looked at him. There is a physician in the lower city, he said, on the street, that used to be Miller's Row. He owes me a significant favor. Tell him the king sent you. He'll provide whatever you need for the next 9 days. She stood very still. And after the 9 days, she said. He looked at her. The door behind his expression was closed. Solid stone, same as always. She could not see anything through it. Come back through the gate, he said. The east one. Unlocked, as yourself. She did not say anything. He did not say anything else. The wind moved between them. She walked through the arch. The service alley was narrow and dark and smelled like the city, coal smoke and bread from somewhere, and the river that ran along the east edge of the lower district, which never quite stopped smelling like itself no matter the season. She moved fast, not running. Running attracted attention. She moved in the particular gear between walking and running that she had developed over years of needing to be somewhere else faster than was dignified. Long strides, controlled, purposeful, the gait of a person who has every right to be exactly where they are going. She got to the end of the alley before her hands started shaking. Not from cold. She pressed both hands flat against her coat, felt the vial through the layers, felt the wax seal under the cloth. Fine. Still fine. She stood in the mouth of the alley where it opened onto the first street of the lower city and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Her hands kept shaking. She thought about the gate, the arch, the deliberate step to the left. Come back through the gate, as yourself. She had spent 2 months being invisible in that palace. She had made herself into furniture. Forgettable. A face that slipped out of memory the moment it left the room. That was the plan. That had always been the plan. Get in, make the compound, get out, deliver the compound, disappear, return to being the traveling healer she technically was when no one needed her to be something else. Come back as yourself. She knew what he meant. She knew that he knew she knew what he meant. That was the thing she was not going to think about. The question he had not asked, the thing in his voice that was not quite flat, the door in the solid stone of him that had opened for 2 seconds and let through a line of light she had absolutely no business noticing. She was a healer, that was all. She had healed him once, by accident, in a candlelit room when they were both different people. She had pressed her hands against his jaw and kept his pulse from unraveling, and then she had sat in a barn for an hour, and then she had kept moving. She was very good at keeping moving. She walked into the lower city. She thought about Nara, 7 years old, 3 doses, 9 days. She thought about the vial. She did not think about the look on his face when she said, "I know." She did not think about the quality of the silence after, the particular way it had felt. Not empty but full, the kind of silence that has been waiting for something to fill it, and has finally found the right thing and doesn't know what to do with that. She did not think about any of that. She walked. Miller's Row was 3 streets north and down the hill. The physician's lamp would be burning. They always kept the lamp burning when there was a sick child on the street, an old tradition from before the flood that the lower city had held on to. She pressed her hand against the vial. Fine. Still fine. The wax seal holding, the compound stable, the temperature fine, everything exactly what it needed to be. She walked faster. The physician was a small man with ink-stained hands and the permanent expression of someone who has seen too much and converted most of it into efficiency. He opened the door at her knock, looked at her face, looked at her coat, and said nothing. "The king sent me," she said. He stood back from the door. Inside, the house smelled like herbs and old wood and the specific combination of things that always made something inside her unknot a little, the smell of a working healer's space, organized chaos, the smell of someone who knew what they were doing. "The girl," she said. "Nara." "Upstairs," he said. "3rd door." She took the stairs. The room was small, and the lamp was low, and Nara was smaller than she had looked through field glasses, which was saying something, because she had looked very small through field glasses. She was 7 years old, and she was asleep in a cot under 2 blankets, breathing in the particular careful way of someone whose lungs were having to think hard about every breath. Seraphine sat on the edge of the cot and took out the vial, broke the wax seal. Careful. The cloth unwound in her hands with the familiarity of something she had done hundreds of times, the hands knowing what to do before the mind finished the instruction. She looked at the compound in the vial. Clear, slightly amber-colored, exactly right. She had crossed a mountain pass for this. 11 days, cold enough that she'd lost feeling in her feet on the 3rd day and had to stop and do something undignified with her socks to get it back. She had ground the bark with a spoon handle in a supply closet at 3 in the morning. She had spent 6 weeks being someone she wasn't. She looked at the sleeping girl and thought, worth it, obviously worth it. There was no calculation here. She administered the 1st dose. Careful, precise. The way she did everything that mattered. Nara stirred slightly, her brow smoothed. Her breathing, not all at once but in slow stages, like something loosening, settled a fraction. Seraphine sat on the edge of the cot for a while after, listening. She was back in the service alley by the time the sky started considering dawn. Not doing anything yet. Just considering it, the way the dark gets a different quality before the light actually shows up. She stood at the mouth of the alley and looked at the palace wall. The east gate was there. She couldn't see the latch from here. She knew it was unlocked. He had said it was unlocked. She had no specific reason to disbelieve him. She had also no particular reason to believe him, except that she had been reading people for a long time, and the one time she had read him clearly, he had been unconscious and therefore not performing anything, and she thought about the scar on his jaw and the particular 2 seconds when his face had done the thing it didn't do, and she thought about "come back as yourself," which was, she was going to put this aside for now. She thought about the physician with his ink-stained hands. "The king sent you," he had said, and let her in without a word, like this was not the first time, like there were arrangements in place she had not known about. Long enough, he had said, when she asked how long he'd known. She thought about 11 days through a mountain pass. She thought about ground bark and a spoon handle and 6 weeks of being furniture. She thought about a candle burning down in a Midlands safe house and 9 hours of keeping a pulse from unraveling. She had said I know, and she had not meant to. She had meant to perform mild confusion and careful distance, and everything had come out wrong because he had said her name, her real name, the buried one, in the dark, and something in her had simply recognized the sound of it. Like she had been waiting, without knowing she was waiting, for someone to use it. She was not going to think about that. She looked at the east gate. 8 days until the second dose. 9 until the last. After that, Nara would be fine. The infection would clear. The compound would do what it was supposed to do, which was the only reliable thing in her experience. Compounds and her hands and the work. Those were reliable. People were complicated. Alpha Kings were something she did not have a category for. She stood in the dark at the mouth of the alley, with her empty vial in her coat pocket, and thought about all of this for exactly as long as she was going to allow herself to think about it, which was 2 minutes. She timed it. 2 minutes, and then she was going to make a practical decision and move. She was good at practical decisions. She was good at moving. She walked back through the arch. The courtyard was empty. Of course it was empty. It was nearly dawn. He had a kingdom to run. He was not going to stand in the cold waiting for her. That was not what was happening here. She crossed the courtyard and found the servant's door she normally used and went back inside. The palace was still sleeping. She moved through the east corridor. The sconces were back where they were supposed to be, she noticed, which meant someone had moved them back, which meant someone had moved them in the first place deliberately, which was information she was going to put away and not examine right now. And up the servant's stair and back to the room she had spent 2 months being Mira Ansel in. She sat on the edge of the bed in her coat. The vial was empty in her pocket. She thought about Nara breathing, the way her brow had smoothed, the loosening. She thought about 8 days and 2 more doses, and ink-stained hands, and a physician who let her in without questions because the king had sent her. She thought about what it meant to come back as yourself. She had not been herself in a very long time, not in any place that counted. She had been Mira Ansel, and before that she had been the traveling healer, and before that she had been the exiled noble's daughter, and before that she had been things she was not going to list right now. She had been useful and quiet, and slightly dull, and she had moved through rooms without being remembered, and she was very, very good at it. She was so good at it that she had been doing it in the Midlands safe house, which was why she had been surprised by herself. 9 hours with her hands on a stranger's jaw in the candlelight, and somewhere around hour 6 she had stopped being the traveling healer and become someone who was simply there, present, not performing anything. She had not been herself like that in a long time. She sat on the bed and pressed the empty vial through her coat and thought about this. She thought about stone and the door in it, and 2 seconds of light. She thought about how she had said "I know" when she had planned to say something else entirely, and how his face had done the thing it didn't do, and how neither of them had looked away. She took off her coat. She lay back on the narrow bed. Outside, the sky was beginning. Not doing anything dramatic about it yet. Just beginning. 8 more days. She would think about the rest after 8 more days. She closed her eyes. The vial was empty in the coat on the floor, and the girl was breathing easier on Miller's Row, and somewhere in this palace a man knew her real name and had moved the sconces and unlocked a gate and stepped to the left and said, "Come back as yourself," and she was not ready to think about what she was. She pressed her hand flat against her sternum, just to feel her own heartbeat. It was doing something. She was not going to examine what. 7 nights later she came back through the east gate. It was unlocked. She had the second vial in her left breast pocket, sealed with wax, wrapped in cloth, exact same weight as the first. She had made it in the physician's workroom at his invitation, using supplies he had laid out before she arrived. Better supplies than she'd had in the palace supply closet. The right mortar, proper measures. She crossed the courtyard. He was there. Of course he was there. He was standing in the same place, same stillness, same wall-like fact of him in the dark. She had thought, in a distant abstract way, that she might have imagined the quality of those 2 seconds, the door, the light, in the week since. that she had constructed something out of exhaustion and high stakes and the particular vulnerability of saying, "I know," when you meant to say something else. She had not imagined it. She could see it from here. Not open, but present. The shape of the door even when it's closed. "The girl?" he said. "Better," Seraphine said. Significantly. He nodded once. She stood 4 feet away from him in the cold courtyard, with the second vial against her ribs, and looked at the scar on his jaw, and thought about all the things that had happened between a Midlands safe house and this exact moment. All the moving, and the distances, and the names she'd used, and the rooms she'd been furniture in, and she thought, by every dead star in the sky, this is a complicated situation. Then she thought, yes, obviously. When has it ever not been? "You could have just told me," she said. "When you found out who I was, you could have come to me. Asked." "Yes," he said. "You let me spend 7 weeks planning an escape." "Yes, that's." She stopped. "I know what it is," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "Did you move the sconces?" A pause. "The east corridor ones. To make me walk into the wall. To slow you down." She thought about this. She thought about the sound she had made walking into the wall, and the particular sting to her dignity, and how she had stood there pressing her hand against the vial, thinking, fine, still fine, the important things are fine. She thought about a man who had let her spend 7 weeks planning a careful escape, and then locked one gate and unlocked another, and moved some sconces, and stood in a courtyard in the cold and waited. "You are," she said, very carefully, "a deeply strange person." "Yes," he said. He said it without any defense in it, just straightforward acknowledgement, the way you'd agree to a factual statement about weather. She looked at him. He looked at her. The door was present. She could feel it from 4 feet away. The shape of it. She thought about "come back as yourself." She thought about what she was, the thing she had pressed her hand against in the dark and refused to examine. "Seraphine," she said. He looked at her. "My name," she said. "You can use it. You've been holding it long enough." Something happened. The door. Just for a moment. Just enough. Then the courtyard, and the cold, and 4 feet of complicated air between them, and she was still herself, whoever that was, and he was still the Alpha King of the Northern Reach, and the vial was against her ribs with 1 dose left, and tomorrow she would deliver it to a 7-year-old girl on the street that used to be Miller's Row. These were the important things. She pressed her hand against the vial. Still fine,